Hello again. Welcome to SEC Baseball Weekly. This week, a focus on the defending national champion Tennessee Volunteers. For perspective on that, we're going to go to our guest, Caleb Jarreau from the Daily Beacon, where he is the sports editor. He is, starting, Caleb, your third year as a sports editor there? That's second year, excuse me.
Sports editor, yeah.
Yeah, which is impressive. Going to get your perspective on the Vols. You grew up in Knoxville and have some historical knowledge of Tennessee baseball that predates your tenure as sports editor. Of course, I'm always, as always, on SEC Baseball Weekly, joined by Doty and Alfred Ezman. But before we get started, we remind you we are sponsored by BetOnline, the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. Think you know your stuff? Get in on our $200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games against the spread every week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of $200,000. When the game's over, head on to our online casino. Get in on the action on a game of blackjack or unwind with over 150 slots games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Bet online, the game starts here. Caleb, I'm going to start with a question. Of course, you started at the Daily Beacon about the time Tennessee baseball was really getting ramped up. They'd been good for a couple of years, but I think you started when the enthusiasm started to rise to a crescendo. You also grew up in Knoxville, so you saw what the perception was around Tennessee baseball. What's it been like just to see the growth of that program from almost – I'm not going to say nothing, because Tennessee had been to College World Series. It's produced one of 2 Hall of Famers in Todd Helton. It has had some good baseball history and tradition, but that had almost been lost until really this decade, when you've seen a resurgence. You saw Tennessee take, I don't know how many thousands of fans to Omaha. What has it been like to see the rise of the program? And when was kind of the point where, all right, we've got something here and it's really poised to take off, if there was one?
Yeah, it's funny because my first assignment as sports editor of the Daily Beacon was I went to Omaha for the 23 World Series, where they got their first win since Chris Burke was playing. So that was kind of like, hey, baseball is going to be something, you're doing and it's real. But I remember growing up, the school coupon book used to have like buy one, get one free tickets for any Tennessee baseball game. Like you could go to an SEC weekend and get a free ticket just to watch the game. Now you can't even get a ticket to get in the stadium. So it has been a real resurgence. And I think really once they brought Vitello in, and I would say probably that COVID year that got canceled was kind of when people started to see that it was legit, because he had so much momentum going into that year that got canceled. And then they come back in 21, make the College World Series. And then in 22, probably have one of the best teams in college baseball. And then, for whatever reason, don't make the College World Series. And then you get back-to-back appearances in a national championship. So I think the resurgence has started since probably that 2020 mark with head coach Tony Vitello. But you mentioned it even before him. Rod Delmonico was here. You think guys like Chris Burke, Todd Helton. Mm-hmm. There was baseball success at Tennessee, but there was never an investment in baseball to back that success. So
I've got it. Tony, go ahead. Let me let you finish. I have a follow-up question. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say Tony gets his success, and then all of a sudden you've got Danny White come in after the whole Jeremy Pruitt fiasco, which is around that COVID time, and start putting money in the baseball program, giving him resources. Yeah. And by that point, his coaches had been with him for, 3-ish, 4-ish years. And then it kind of starts building, and now you've got the momentum you have with the program now.
Yeah, I think because they had pockets under Delmonico and Chris Burke, as you mentioned, who was a tremendous college player, made the pros, but a better college player than probably an MLB guy. And so, again, they had pockets, but it just never really caught on for whatever reason. Just fans still just really, for the most part, didn't care. I think to me, I think what's made the difference, I think one of them you just hit on, the athletic director. I think him holding everybody to a standard of winning and giving out contracts that basically have made Tennessee an impenetrable fortress in terms of guys coming for coaches. No, look, we've seen that work in other ways, predating your tenure on the beat. For a long time, Tennessee was kind of the joke of the buyouts they were paying people. But I think he's been able to identify guys that are great coaches and made it stick. I think the other thing too is just the rise of the SEC network and bringing baseball on TV every week, putting it at the forefronts of people's minds. I think some of what they've done has been some of the success is being great at what you're doing, but it's also kind of hitting it at an opportune time. And I think all the stars seem to have aligned for Tennessee baseball in that regard.
Yeah, and I think to that point, like the schools who were good at baseball, like, LSU comes to mind, or some of the California schools like USC, the historically great schools, Texas, their baseball culture was there already and success kind of followed it. Like Skip Bertman built LSU and fans were packing out the old Alec Box Stadium. Tennessee didn't have that. So when they had success in pockets and it didn't carry over, well, fans were going to go over to Neyland Stadium anyway and watch football and, maybe dabble in basketball and then just wait for football to come back. So I think you're right that the sport has grown and it's kind of become cool, I guess, to be a college baseball fan again. And I think that's what's great about Tony Vitello and his staff and this play style they have is that it attracts fans to the ballpark. People want to watch Tennessee play baseball. They're not going out there and playing small ball and bunting the ball and stealing every base. They're out there trying to hit it as far as they can, and then they've got guys popping triple digits on the mound. It's a fun style of baseball, and Vitello is an energetic coach and passionate about what he does, and you can see that on the field. So I think that attracts fan attention. And also, even to build on the SEC network thing, having alum like Chris Burke who are in the SEC network pipeline and calling games and putting Tennessee on the forefront, like, hey, I played here and we didn't get fan support, and I was one of the best college baseball players, historically. Now look at the program. You should watch these guys because in 15, 20 years, they're going to be in his shoes.
Caleb, I want to talk to you and ask you about just the relationship with the Tennessee fans and Tony Vitello. Like when I saw the Tennessee Chattanooga football game and the Tennessee band in halftime spelled out his name, it's like, okay, this is a unique relationship. Just how would you describe it? Just like how beloved is Tony Vitello in Knoxville?
Yeah, I think this fan base gravitates towards all of these head coaches when they find success, just as quick as they turn on some of the old head coaches when they didn't find success. Tony, like I said, he attracts fan attention. He wants that attention. The first thing that pops in my mind was he got the ice bath dumped on him after winning the national championship, took a couple pictures, and the first thing he did was run to the fans down the left field line and jump into the stands to celebrate with them. So it's a mutual relationship where the fans adore Tony Vitello, and on the same token, he gives that love right back to them. He's one of the last guys at the park signing autographs every night, whether it's in the parking lot or on the field. And they truly do. They just gravitate to him. He's a passionate coach. And I think with this new contract that he just signed, there wasn't a single fan balking at the thought of having the highest paid baseball head coach or where's the money going to come from. They're like, yeah, let's pay this guy, make his buyout astronomical so that way he can never leave Knoxville and he coaches Tennessee forever. And he's come into a program that was not a powerhouse program in the SEC and had one of probably the worst stadiums in the SEC, I would say. Obviously, it's being renovated now, and that's changed. But when he first took over, it was not a very nice stadium, didn't have turf. The playing surface wasn't the best. Now he's turned it into they're investing in the stadium. He's got turf. He's got a new stadium. Fans love it. Fans love him. And I think it all just kind of has come into this ball, I guess, to move forward. But 50,000 estimated people attended the parade just to see Tony Vitello come down Gay Street with the trophy. So I think it's a mutual relationship, and they've just kind of adored him for rebuilding this program. And I think if any sport, no matter what it is, if it's winning, Tennessee fans are behind it.
Caleb, talking about this national title team, the mantra I was kind of saying on the show, and Graham and Chris were, I think, behind me on it as the tournament went on. It sort of felt like this national title team, it was just a buildup of you have guys who are just coming back, from teams that have gone to Omaha in the past. Drew Beam, Blake Burke, Kirby Cannell is a huge one just because of how long he was with the program and stuff. And it felt like once they won it this year, it was like, well, they've had these guys who have been there before, and they just kind of held on to them long enough that eventually the glass broke, so to speak. Do you think that's the case with this team and how they were able to win it? Or what was your thoughts on, what the final push was to get to finally, climbing the mountain to win it all?
Yeah, I would go all the way back to 2022, that team that did make it to Omaha and lost to Notre Dame in the Knoxville Super Regional, a lot of those guys were on that team. That was Drew Bream's freshman year. He didn't get to pitch in that series. Obviously, Kirby Connell was still there. He's been there like 25 years. But in that Notre Dame Super Regional, Tennessee was played tight. They weren't themselves. That the team that that's maybe got too much energy in that series. And I think you saw lessons from that in the 23 team, which had to go on the road and kind of, earn their way to Omaha the hardest way possible, truthfully. And then that all culminated in this 24 team, like you said. And also to me, being in Omaha in 23, a lot of guys were taking videos of the stadium, kind of awestruck. The lights are super bright. That didn't happen in 2024. I mean, when you walked in the stadium that night that Tennessee was playing Florida State, music coming from Tennessee's locker room was blaring inside the halls of Charles Schwab's field or stadium, whatever it's called. You could hear that they were ready to play. They knew – it felt like to me they knew the whole time they were winning that championship. And after that Florida State win, which was one of the toughest teams in the tournament, especially with their ace on the mound, once they defeated Florida State, I think it kind of just clicked. They're like, hey, we're not going to lose in Omaha. We're going to win this thing. So I agree. I think it started all the way back at 22, using some of those experiences. And then just the team's personality of not being as emotional as that 22 team. The bat flips weren't as big. They're not flipping off the center fielder. Stuff like that kind of toned it down a little bit. And then they put all that together for a run in Omaha. So, yeah, I would definitely say having some of those veterans on the team kind of helped that. And then you return some a little bit next year, and that'll help too. Also, coaching experiences, I think, because Tony had never been in those experiences as a head coach, and he kicks himself for that 22 tournament where he didn't put Beam in and they lost to Notre Dame. Maybe he undercoached, overcoached. So that's always a storyline there, but he just kind of let them play in 24, let them decide the game. When Aaron Combs, I think the moment that kind of encompasses that is when Aaron Combs had the pass ball to score a run in that final game of the College World Series finals, and he's laughing on the mound. Tony just stood in the dugout and let him do his thing. They ended up winning the whole thing. So I think it's a mix of everybody, coaches included, building on those experiences. And now that they have those experiences, I think you can finally start to build on those and maybe make it really a powerhouse program, because there's always the conversations of, if you don't have a ring, how much of a powerhouse really are you?
Caleb, we all like to use the phrase, well, this is the moment when I knew it was going to happen. And I tend to discount that, because if we know something's going to happen, we were all going to Vegas and we're all probably multimillionaires and not doing the show. But was there a moment where you're like, all right, I think this is going to be their year, as you covered them?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I think throughout the whole year, the pitching staff never made me think they were going to win a championship. And then somewhere in SEC play, about halfway through SEC play, once the Chris Stamos, AJ Causey thing started happening and having success, I was like, okay, maybe they can. I think Kentucky probably was that turning point for me, where they went to Kentucky and won that series against a Kentucky team that thought they were on top of the moon at that point. So I think that was probably the moment for me where I was like, this team can contend. And then they kept winning. They lost to Evansville. That kind of threw me for a loop. But they kept winning. SEC tournament was another one where that really clicked too, because they won the SEC tournament with pitching depth. The whole time we were there, we were like, all right, they lost game one. I have no idea who they're going to roll out for this next game. They'll probably chalk it up, go back to Knoxville, take a couple of days off, get ready for the postseason. And they kept winning with freshman pitchers, or guys like Marcus Phillips, who didn't pitch a lot. They just kept rolling out these guys who weren't big names and winning baseball games against very good SEC teams. So during that SEC tournament, you think about the win over Vanderbilt there, the win over Mississippi State in there, the SEC championship, winning the SEC championship. Stuff like that started to make me click, like, yeah, this team is different. And then once they got to Omaha and had that walk-off against Florida State, that is when I was like, because that was the best team to me besides Tennessee in that tournament, was Florida State. And, of course, they matched up in that first game. And Tennessee has demons from those first game matchups. You think back to Virginia in 21 or facing Paul Skeens and LSU in 23. Once they got over Florida State, it was smooth sailing from there. So I don't know if there was one moment, because I really was not bought in on the pitching staff for much of the season. So I think probably the SEC tournament, when they showed that pitching depth, and still pitching had problems in Omaha, but they were able to overcome it. So I would probably say Hoover-ish, when the pitching staff started to come into its own, would be when I realized they could contend for a championship. And then once they beat Florida State, it was like, yeah, they're definitely making it. And once they make it, if they can win, it is up to them.
You mentioned the baseball stadium earlier. What are the latest updates with the renovations to Lindsey Nelson?
Yeah, so the press box is gone, but the problem is it's I guess there's pipes under the stadium. You could tell it was going to be delayed. So their goal was, as soon as Tennessee was done, they're hosting no summer tournaments, no travel ball, nothing like that, and they're just going to dive into these developments and finish them before the next season. It was a 3-year project stuffed into a 2-year time frame, which will now be back to a 3-year time frame because they ran into issues with utilities and piping in the road. And you could tell too, because when we left for Omaha, it was clear they were taking off the road, tearing down stuff, and then when we got back from Omaha, it looked exactly the same. So they ran into issues with those pipes. That's delayed the project. Most of the stuff will be done that normal fans will see. So like stadium concourse renovations, more seats. It's the luxury stuff, those boxes that they were planning to kind of take the stadium to that upper echelon and get, more expensive tickets sold. The press box, we have no idea if that will be done. So we might be sitting in the stands, and the PA announcer might be sitting next to a fan in the stands once the season comes around. So who knows? But yeah, so it'll be delayed to a 3rd year, which it was a 3-year project they were trying to stuff into 2 years. It'll look a lot different. I think the entryway is one of the places they will delay as well, just because that's more of a visual appearance thing more than anything, quantitative. So it's delayed. They're doing a lot of stuff right now. The roads are closed all around it. I think that road's going to remain closed until they finish it. But as for what will be done, they say the press box is the main thing that's not going to be finished. Obviously, they already changed the plans once, so that could happen again. Either way, the stadium is still trending in the right direction from what it came from under Tony, because even with the left field concourse being done and the porches and all the temporary bleachers that were in, it was leaps and bounds improvement from what it was. And they have, during the NCAA tournament when Evansville was there, even during the regional, me and a couple friends on the beat would just sit at those tables in left field and watch BP. And that's a great environment, great view down there. You can't beat that. And before that, there was nothing there. It was just a wall. So they've built it up a ton already. So we'll see what actually finishes come season time, and then what the tent press box will look like, or if we even have a seat come season time.
All right, Caleb, also looking ahead to next season as well. Obviously, a ton of guys, were lost on this team to the MLB draft. Christian Moore, obviously being one, Blake Burke. The list goes on and on, Drew Beam, so on and so forth. But they brought in another good transfer class. Obviously, I think Andrew Fisher and Liam Doyle headline it, the Ole Miss duo, as like the big 2 grabs they got. There's guys beyond that too that I was a fan of. Tanner Franklin from Kennesaw State, I thought was a really good arm that they got early on in the portal and stuff like that. They bring in the number 1 high school class as well this year too. Who are some guys that impress you heading into next year that everyone should look out for?
Yeah, truthfully, with the high school class, they haven't started fall practice yet. So as for those guys, it's just high school numbers on paper. But there are exciting bats in that class. And to me, when you look at the roster just, on paper, the team could be better than it was last year, top to bottom, especially with the pitching staff. You mentioned Tanner Franklin. That's a guy I'm really excited for. Tennessee wanted him out of high school. He's from Jefferson County, which is, 30, 45 minutes from Tennessee. But he chose to go to Kennesaw State to get innings, because he knew if he went to Tennessee, you're probably sitting most of your freshman year, pitching midweeks. Even your sophomore year, you might not get in the game. So he chose to go to Kennesaw State to get innings, and he was one of their dudes. He's an upper 90s guy. You give him Frank Anderson in an offseason, he could probably pop triple digits with, 3 good pitches, had a lot of success in the Cape Cod League. And his recruitment was really quick. He had a coach from Jefferson County reach out to Tony and was like, hey, he might be willing to transfer if you talk to him. Tony goes up to the Cape Cod League, says, hey, we want to use you out of the bullpen. Tanner Franklin says, sure. And now, he commits to Tennessee and signs. So that was an easy recruitment. That's what you see with a lot of Tony Vitello recruitments in the transfer portal, is he's not going to put up with a lot of NIL numbers. If a guy approaches him asking for money, that's not what he wants. He wants a guy who wants to play for Tennessee. Tanner Franklin fits that mold. The Louisville infielder, Gavin Kilen, fits that mold. ACC 3rd team. He's a lefty bat. That'll help this lineup. And the Ole Miss guys were really big pickups. 2 roommates who come in together that faced Tennessee a couple years ago, or at least Fisher did. Doyle was at Coastal. And then they both have full SEC seasons under their belts. So there's no learning curve for those guys. They know what to expect. They're playing in the same league, just with a different jersey. So Fisher led Ole Miss's offense in almost every category. Yes, it wasn't a good Ole Miss team, but still, it's a feat in the SEC to lead your team in offense. And then obviously Doyle, a lefty pitcher. His ERA was, I think, 3s, 4s. But once again, you get him Frank Anderson, get him some bullpens and offseason under his belt, he'll be good. So I don't know if there's one person that stands out. I do like the Ole Miss duo just because they can kind of be instant contributors. They know what to expect. There's no learning curve from them. And then I do really like Tanner Franklin as a hometown guy. I think his stuff will play in the SEC, and he can transfer pretty well.
Caleb, with the acknowledgement, I'm asking you a ridiculously premature question. You got to see how it goes in fall ball. You know there's going to be injuries. You know there's going to be a freshman from high school. Because I don't think our high school rating systems are great in terms of telling us what to expect for who will pop. With the acknowledgement that you mentioned a couple of guys, I think we're pretty sure will be part of things. Andrew Fisher would be one of them. Gavin Kilen would be one. Dean Curley would be one. I don't know where they settle on all those guys on positions because you got a little bit of overlap there. But what are your biggest questions going into fall ball? I think position battles and who settles where would be part of it. And maybe just a thing that you see as I don't know that weakness is fair because it feels like they got most of their bases covered with talent, but maybe where you've got a question relative to where you think they'll be strong.
Yeah, I think, truthfully, how do you keep everybody happy on this team? Because there are so many players, and there's 9 spots on the field. You've got, guys that come to mind like Cannon Peebles, who didn't get a lot of talk last year, but he had some of the biggest at-bats in the College World Series for Tennessee. You think about drawing that walk against Florida State to keep the lineup moving. If he grounds into a double play there, that game's over and Tennessee might not win a national championship. So he's a guy that struggled early in the year. He was kind of in his head a little bit, coming into the SEC, and you hit that wall when you get to that first SEC weekend, and all of a sudden these guys aren't throwing, 90s. They're throwing 96 with 4 pitches on the mound. He hit that wall, struggled. I think he's a guy that can break out. Dalton Bargo's another guy with SEC experience who played here and there sparingly. He's another guy that can break out. So my biggest question, truthfully, is where does everybody go? Because you have Dalton Bargo and you have Dean Curley and Ariel Antigua, who Ariel Antigua was one of the best gloves that was on this team last year. You still have Hunter Inslee back, so he's going to play. What about in the outfield? Does Colby Bacchus get a spot? You still have Stone Lawless, a younger guy. My biggest question is where will everybody fit in? Who's the DH? Who's the best defensive guys? How will he slot this lineup? Because like I said, on paper, like raw talent-wise, I think this might be a better team just because last year's team was so good top end and everybody fell in behind. I think 1 through 9, this team can be better. It's just like where does everybody fit in? And then pitching-wise, you still have to find those dudes. You bring back some guys. Nate Snead will be a guy that'll be very big for this baseball team next year. A.J. Russell had Tommy John in end of April, early May, but they said he didn't have the full reconstruction. He just had the bracing procedure. So does that mean he'll be able to come back? Some say he can, with the bracing procedure, he can start throwing off a mound in January. Others say it might not be till, SEC play. That's another question. But if everybody stays healthy, I think you have a lot of talent just for 9 spots on the field. And I'm curious to see where everybody slots in. And I'm also curious to see in fall practice some of these utility guys like a Dalton Bargo or a Cannon Peebles, if they're in their home positions or if Tony has those guys maybe trying to learn right field or playing first base to try to get as many bats on the field as he can.
Yeah, the left side of the infield to me is going to be interesting because I would think that Fisher would stay at third. I would think, Dean Curley was your shortstop last year and I thought did a really good job for a freshman. But you brought in a transfer who was probably the top shortstop transfer on the market. Yeah. Now, look, I think the easy answer is you got a large hole at second base after Christian Moore moved on to the MLB draft and was picked high. But so it seems to me like if you can play shortstop, you can play second. But sometimes, everybody wants to be the shortstop, right? I'll be very interested what they do with that and how that's handled.
Yeah, and Ariel was easily one of the best probably the best defensive infielder on last year's team. He just he got hurt probably 2 weeks before the season because in their mock series they do a week before the year, he slid into a base and stubbed his hand and broke his hand. So that's pretty hamper. That's a pretty hampering injury if you're a baseball player trying to swing a bat. So his bat never caught up last year, but he was easily one of the best defensive players on this team. He played second a little bit. He played short a little bit. He can slot in at second, but like you said, Andrew Fisher probably didn't transfer to Tennessee to DH. Like, he's going to want to play the infield, get some tape of him playing the infield. Louisville kid, Kilen from there, he's a good shortstop. Does he play at shortstop? Does he move to second? Does Ariel play at second? Where do you put Dean Curley? Because I don't think you want to throw a guy to the side that started for you as a freshman and helped lead you to a College World Series while middle of the road batting average, but still put together really good at bats, had a good, on base percentage. Does he play first base? Just teach him first base and throw him over there. Is he your DH? So that's what I'm saying. There's just so many spots there's a little amount of spots, I should say, for a lot of talent. And I don't know where you're going to slot guys. And that's why I'm curious here in a couple weeks when they start fall practice, where everybody's practicing. If they just are they going to throw 4 guys at shortstop and say, hey, go battle it out? Or are they going to move some guys around and see who can fit where? Because I think knowing Vitello, he's going to try to get as many bats on the field as he can. And that means he's going to move some guys around. Like last fall, Blake Burke was practicing in right field because there's a second there where it looked like Tavares Tears would be better at first base than the outfield because he had some leg injuries his first couple of years. That didn't come to be, but still, it just shows that Tony wants to make sure the bats are on the field in any way he can, and that meant Blake Burke was tracking down pop flies in right field for a couple fall practices.
Caleb, what's your best guess of just what the future holds for this Tennessee baseball program? Because from the outside looking in, like, why would Tony Vitello leave? Like, he gets everything that he asked for. He's getting paid well. Do you see him as somebody that can be at Tennessee 20 years, like Mike Bianco, Van Horn, Corbin, that kind of thing? Like, it just seems like he could be a legend. Just what do you think the future of the Tennessee baseball program holds?
Yeah, I think you see all the time from mostly Arkansas fans on Twitter that they want to fire Van Horn and try to get Vitello to Fayetteville. And I just don't see a world where he leaves. I mean, he just became the highest paid coach in college baseball. So if he's leaving for money, that doesn't make sense. He's never going to get fired from Tennessee. He just won a championship in baseball at a school that has never won a championship in baseball, much less cared about baseball, like we've talked about more over 5 years ago. So I just don't see a world where he leaves. And I also like that he is coaching the way he wants to now. Like I said, with his recruitment in the transfer portal, this isn't a team built on NIL money. It's a team that guys just want to play for Tony Vitello and want to win championships. So it's a sustainable model he has here. And I think that's evident, too, in the fact that he brought back most of his coaches from his original coaching staff. So, like, Ross Kivett returned. He was the guy who got tossed, a couple times in that 22 season. He was the energy in the dugout. He had worked his way up to an associate head coach at a, college baseball school, and now he's back. Ricky Martinez comes back to be a player development guy. He played for Vitello. So it's all kind of coming together that guys want to come coach for Vitello, guys want to come play for Vitello. He has no reason to leave if it's not money. And, I mean, even a guy like Elander, he was in the running for head coaching jobs this year. He chose to stay because he knows that he can still have success at Tennessee. And I think that's the biggest thing is, can Vitello succeed at Tennessee? And he's happy in Knoxville, it seems. I haven't heard any otherwise or seen otherwise. So I don't think Vitello will leave. I think the program keeps their momentum rolling. Do they win back-to-back national championships? That's really hard to do in baseball, so I wouldn't set your expectations that high. But I think the team will consistently be a contender in the SEC and join that upper echelon of the sport that has been dominated in the SEC by the Mississippi schools, LSU and Vanderbilt, Arkansas. And I think Tennessee's now in that conversation and can maybe pass, some of the Mississippi schools that have been squandering the past couple of years. So I'm with you. I don't think he leaves. I mean, the money's there. Success is there. He can coach the way he wants to. Nobody's questioning what he does. Danny White just kind of throws him out there, lets him go. And also you see the investment from the school in building up the stadium. So everything is trending in the right direction for this program, and I think it'll continue to do that. Maybe they take a step back in a couple years. I mean, baseball is hard. It's one of the hardest sports to win at. It's very weird, especially in college, because you're taking 18, 19-year-olds and saying, hey, you're going to fail almost every day you play this sport. Now go win a championship. It's hard to do. And, I mean, that's just college baseball. You see it. I just mentioned it before, the Mississippi schools. Those schools were at the top of the sport 3-4 years ago. And now, I mean, they didn't make one of them didn't make the SEC tournament. So that's just the sport.
Caleb, I'm going to backtrack a little to this question back to Omaha and stuff. A big story for this team throughout the season was that home run record LSU has that still stood the test of time. Barely. I think it was 5 or 4 home runs being the difference in the end when it was all said and done, just because this Tennessee team left and right could hit a lot of home runs. One guy who was doing it seemingly when he needed to in clutch moments, and not just home runs, but clutch hits, was Dylan Dreiling during the College World Series. He was huge throughout the season too, but I think he got kind of in the shadow a little bit of Christian Moore, Blake Burke, and even Billy Amick at times for really all the guys on this team that just hit, lump sums of home runs. I think Chris, talked about it a lot. Graham, we all talked about it a lot on here, but Dylan Dreiling kind of is the unsung hero of that, Omaha team with what he was able to do. And overall, just the sheer amount of home runs they were able to hit, it just seemingly was infectious amongst all of them. What, I guess you were around this team a ton. What did you see, that kept that infectious home run energy going throughout the year? That eventually, I think, led to Dreiling just popping off like he did at the end.
Yeah, I think truthfully, speaking of Dylan Dreiling, he's not a loud guy, not very emotional. I mean, he'll bat flip once or twice when he hits a home run, but he's not one of those rah-rah guys. When he would do media, his answers were like, he'd super quiet, say 1 or 2 sentences and be done. But on the field, he was just their guy, Mr. Consistent. A lot of people, scouts too, had questions if his outfield defense would play. But when you have that bat, you can throw him into right field at the professional level and just let him play. And I think every bat in this offense last year and for the years moving forward is expected to play with some pop. Now, even Dean Curley, freshman shortstop, really not a power guy purely, was still able to hit home runs and, contribute to the power stats of this offense. So I would say it is an infectious kind of offense. One guy hits a home run, now the next guy wants to hit a home run. Blake Burke and Christian Moore were battling for the seat. Obviously Christian Moore has the career record. They're battling for the season, career home run record the entire season, bouncing back and forth. Guys see that. Like, you see that your teammate is now on the top of the leaderboard of home runs. You want to do that. So I think that kind of pushes everybody else. Playing in Lindsey Nelson Stadium does help, even though people say a lot of the home runs are out at most SEC stadiums. You still get a couple here and there that are wall scrapers at Lindsey Nelson that would be doubles at other parks. I mean, that happens. But it all comes back really to Elander and his approach with the offense. He's in the cages teaching the offense. They have good approaches. You look at Blake Burke, I think he's the guy that really grew the most from freshman to junior year this past season, because as a freshman and sophomore, if you threw Blake Burke a spinner, he was swinging and missing and walking back to the dugout. His junior season, he really adopted the approach that Elander tries to get these guys to take, which is, hey, if you get a fastball down the middle, hit it 400 feet dead center and, round the bases. If you get a curveball or a backdoor slider, take your single to the right side and just, wait for the next at bat. And I think that's really the difference, too, between this year's team and 22 that didn't make it. Because 22, to me, felt really boom or bust. Like, they're either hitting a massive home run, a grand slam, and you're scoring 4 runs, or you're getting 3 pop-outs and moving on. I think this team really took what other pitchers gave them, which made it really tough to play against. Because if they're going to hit a single to the right side and you throw them a slider, so then next to the bat you try to throw a fastball, now they've hit a 3-run home run to left field, you really can't win. So I think it all comes back to the approach with this team of next guy up mentality. Everybody's always talked about, like, hey, if I go up in the 2-hole and hit a single, I know the guy behind me is going to try to hit a home run. And just kind of moving the bat down the lineup and going and just playing station to station, truthfully. They weren't trying to do too much. And I think that's where that comes in, Alfred, is those guys took the home runs that they were given. They weren't trying to force home runs. And that resulted in what you saw, because they wanted to win baseball games and home runs kind of followed. And once again, for a guy like Dylan Dreiling, you don't want to pitch to Blake Burke. You don't want to pitch to Christian Moore. You don't want to pitch to Gavaris Tears. Who are you going to pitch to? And so he got lucky that, maybe Blake Burke draws a walk, and now all of a sudden, well, we can't walk Dylan Dreiling, and he gets a nuke. So that's another thing, too, is if you're playing in a lineup with 9 guys who are threats, like, what are you going to do? Who are you going to pitch to? Cal Stark would draw a walk in the 9-hole. Now you've got Christian Moore up where you can't walk Christian Moore, too, and then he would hit a home run or hit a double or just make something happen. So it all is a team game in the end. And I think Dylan Dreiling benefited from playing behind Christian Moore and Blake Burke. Blake Burke benefited from playing behind Christian Moore, Cal Stark even in the 9 hole. So it's just everything all came together, and you end up with the home run numbers you got and just passing the bat down the line. And Dylan Dreiling with the Hickory Crawdads seems to be doing all right for himself. Already has his first professional home run.
Let's go one more time around the table, and Graham, Alfred, if you want to ask, more than one, you're welcome to. But I've just got one more. Caleb, I agree. I think that's an attractive place to play right now, and when you win, the situation recruits to itself. But I think one thing that was key for Tennessee was I feel like they got ahead in NIL. They were out in front. I think they were probably winning some bids for some kids. And look, let's face it, that's what talks in every sport right now. So I think one thing that I really think Danny White has done for Tennessee is he's gotten them out ahead in everything that really matters right now. I think, again, you've seen it in NIL across all the teams, and I think you're seeing it at facilities. They're about to spend a bunch of money on renovating that stadium. What has been the key to getting the money behind Tennessee baseball? If you'd said that 5 years ago, that money's going to line up behind Tennessee baseball and they're going to spend as much as anybody, you've been laughed out of the room. What's been the key to that, and who have been the players, if you know, who are writing the checks in that, or the entities or whatever?
Yeah, I think it really goes back to what I said earlier, where Tennessee fans and boosters will get behind a winning coach in a sport that's winning. Like we mentioned, baseball is not big, and all of a sudden they were big, and Tennessee got behind that. They want to invest in Tony Vitello. They want to invest in the players. They want to invest in the facilities. And it's all kind of come back to Danny White's mantra, which if Tennessee is fielding a team in a sport, that team is going to be competitive. Well, as soon as the women's basketball team didn't seem to be trending in that direction, he made a change. He wants every sport that Tennessee's putting, all the way down to cross country. He hired a great cross country coach when Tennessee's left for Colorado because he wants to make sure any sport that has a UT or any player that's wearing orange is going to be competitive. And that goes all the way from, top to bottom. And you see that with Tennessee. And I also think it helps that Vitello doesn't enter the portal looking for NIL bids. Like, he doesn't try to straight up buy players. And I think that earns some respect too from boosters, where it's like, we're going to invest in Vitello, we're going to invest in these players, and they trust how he's going to spend the money. He knows he's not going to throw it around willy-nilly. Once you get a guy on campus, if he's a team player, you're going to invest in that guy, invest in everything around it. There was a story I was told from this past portal season where, a kid in the portal had visited 2 schools in the SEC and basically just sent Tony a number. And Tony went off in a press conference about this. Obviously didn't mention the player or the other school or anything like that. But he went off in this press conference talking about, if you want to come to Tennessee just for money, it's not going to happen. And the backstory is that this kid texted Tony. He was like, hey, this is my number. And Tony told him not even to visit. Like, if you're going to enter this conversation talking about money, that's not what he's going to be about. So I think that helps too. And it's just the culture around the program makes it easy to buy into and easy to invest into. But you mentioned it. The momentum's going the same way. Those facilities are going to be amazing once they're done. And it's all just about winning. If you win, you get the support, you get the investment. Danny White wants to be, like I said, competitive in everything. So if you're competitive, he's going to invest in you. If you're not, he's probably going to go a different direction. So I really just think it comes down to the fact that, Tony Vitello found success, and the money and the investment and everything is followed after that, especially with the fanfare. And at the end of the day, there's not many schools. No, I don't think there might be 2 baseball schools that make money on baseball. It's not a revenue sport. But for Tennessee, at this point, it's how can we lose the least amount of money on baseball? And Tony's kind of built it up to that. So Danny White is really big on the money and investing and, keeping Tennessee's budget positive. I don't think he's been in debt once. And you see that with how he's partnered with Pilot for the NIL Stadium renovations. I would assume Lindsey Nelson's next. Danny White didn't commit to anything on that front, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's a partner for the Lindsey Nelson project soon.
What's your best guess on what the rotation will look like for this upcoming season? Weekend rotation.
That might be the toughest question of the day. I think Nate Snead will be in there. I think he can transition back to his starter role because you think about it, last year he was working 5-6 innings out of the pen anyway. So I think Nate Snead will be in the mix. There's some guys. Before the transfer portal, I would have said Matthew Dallas would be in the rotation, super lanky lefty. He ended up transferring to Wake Forest because he didn't think he got enough innings as a freshman. I think, truthfully, in that situation, he pitched a lot in high school. And Tennessee, one of Frank Anderson's, 10 commandments is you're not going to throw so much you get Tommy John. You're not going to throw so much you get hurt. They'd rather be conservative with guys more so than push them. And I think Matthew Dallas is one of those guys they were conservative with, and I don't think he appreciated it as much, so he transferred. I think Dylan Loy out of Pigeon Forge really showed last year why he can be a threat in the SEC. Maybe he could slot into that starting rotation. AJ Russell, if he's healthy, will 100% be in the starting rotation. And I think fall practice will be used to find a third starter, who will slot in that third spot. Tanner Franklin out of the portal, I don't think will be a starter. Maybe he wants to become a starter. To me, he seems more like a bullpen guy. So truthfully, for the Sunday guy, I don't have an answer for you. I think that's what fall practice will be for. I mean, there's a lot of talent on this roster. I still think pitching is probably the weakest point of this roster, but I said that last year and they won a championship. So I think it'll be a fall practice thing. If AJ Russell's healthy, I'm sure we'll find out about that once fall practice starts up. And then you've got a lot of talent behind that. So that is definitely the hardest question of the day because there's so many question marks with the pitching staff. Could you lose so much like we've talked about? Drew Beam's gone. I really do think Nate Snead can be in an ace role for you because he has pitched in the SEC, pitched in the biggest moments, and shown that he has the stuff to play. He struggled with control at times, but not to the point where he had to get pulled from games. It was just more so, maybe one bad inning would hurt a quality start. So I think for sure Nate Snead, AJ Russell if he's healthy, mix in one of those sophomores that were freshmen last year, like a Matthew Dallas, Braden Sharp type, and then, Sunday might be by committee, which, I mean, it was last year, and before they found Xander Seacrest as that guy.
Caleb, I guess we're just going to end with hard questions because I got one too to wrap it up. But here in September 2024 for the 2025 college baseball season, what's a hitter that's going to surprise you next year? I think we know what Hunter Ensley's going to do, what some of these transfers like Klein and Fisher are going to do, things like that. Who's a guy who you think is going to get more time, who is going to surprise us like, he didn't play a lot last year, and here he is on the scene in 2025. What hitter do you think fits that category for next season?
Yeah, give me Cannon Peebles all the way. I think he was in his head last year, struggling to transfer to the SEC. I mean, it's a big transition because I think the biggest difference, the ACC and SEC can probably compete top-end talent-wise. I think in the SEC, there's no weekends off. You even think about this year, Kentucky was good. Georgia was good. There was never a weekend series where you could trot out a guy like Cannon Peebles and say, hey, you're not going to face plus talent, get your feet under you here. That just doesn't happen in the SEC. So I think he's going to come back with a vengeance after last year, hopefully get out of his head. I know he messed with his swing a little bit, was doing that stuff midseason. That's obviously never good. Get out of your head, play baseball, maybe catch a little bit. At NC State, he was a catcher. At NC State, he was one of their best bats. He stuck around. He could have easily transferred to somewhere where he would get easy playing time, but he stuck around at Tennessee. So give me Cannon Peebles. I think he'll be a guy that will emerge for this team and join the solidified guys, like you mentioned, like a Hunter Ensley or, an Andrew Fisher that what they're going to do. I think Cannon Peebles can join that group. And he flashed a little bit last year, showed the pop a little bit, showed that he was a smart hitter with the walks that we talked about. So I think he'll take the next step next year.
Caleb, you really know your stuff. It was a pleasure talking to you today. I think this was a great conversation. I hope people listen to all of it because I think it was really insightful. Tell people where they can find your work. And I think you finish in, you told me before the show, you're finishing in the coming year, right?
Yeah, so I'll graduate in May 2025. I post everything on my Twitter, which is at Caleb Jarreau 16. You can find all of our student newspaper stuff at utdailybeacon.com. I always like to flex that before Tennessee baseball was good, we had Beacon alum like Ryan Shumpert, who a lot of people know, who were sitting in the Lindsey Nelson Stadium press box, usually by themselves, covering baseball because we were one of the few outlets who did it. So we've been around. We've been covering baseball a while, and we'll continue to do it. So right now we're obviously in the midst of football. I got an email the other day that, Market Square Madness for basketball kicks up in just over a month. So before long, we'll be back to this juggling 3 sports and doing all that fun stuff. So, yeah, Caleb Jarreau 16 on Twitter and utdailybeacon.com for all of our work.
Yeah, there's never a day off. And man, I love Ryan. Ryan is so good at this. And you're right. He was the only guy covering them he may be Trey Wallace when this started to blow up. So, and both those guys are friends. So, yeah, thank you so much for your time today, and I know we'll have you on at some point, probably before the season, and certainly during the season. I think Tennessee will look to be and maybe be the preseason favorite to repeat as national champions. So, anyway, big season ahead. We are here to cover it in the offseason. We're doing SEC baseball weekly, every week. Well, for the most part, we got a couple episodes backlogged that we need to publish as we're busy with football, but those are coming. If you like this, we cover baseball, basketball, and football with equal passion year round. Best way to get our content, hit the subscribe button and enable your notifications so when we have content coming out, also all of our shows reach millions of people a year. Caroline.smith@southeastern14.com for your advertising inquiries. For Graham Doty and Alfred Ezman, I'm Chris Lee. We are Southeastern 16, presented by BetOnline.